Future Warrior, Dawn of the Deimos. Chapter 14. Over the next 16 hours, the entire Terra Nova flowed into the European theater of operations, the division being attached to the UEA's newly formed Army Group Germany. All over Earth, the movement of soldiers and materials increased as the final defensive plan was activated, all regular, reserve, and militia forces preparing themselves and their equipment for imminent combat. In the space surrounding Earth, the ships of the First Fleet stood ready, representing the greatest concentration of warships ever assembled under a single fleet command. As every hour passed, the number of ships grew steadily as the outer fleets streamed back into the home system, many of the arriving ships heavily damaged. With the fleets came the remnants of the attached Marine and UEA divisions, the Marines heading to their base of operations and headquarters at UEF Lunar, while the UEA divisions were immediately transported straight to Earth to be re-equipped and resupplied before being integrated into the established regional army groups, as every available gun and soldier was ruthlessly requisitioned for the defense of the homeworld. Stalker left Zoe and a piece of himself behind as he had boarded the transport, knowing that it was unlikely that either of them would have the time to talk again for some time. Stalker going to lead his company while Zoe went to see what remained of her regiment and to argue with the intelligence branch assessors. They had kissed and embraced with a primal ferocity on the landing pad, the smoke from smoldering buildings and aircraft still rising behind them. The scene had caused many to stop and watch. The midnight black armored warrior and the dirty blood-stained UEAF officer, her blonde hair fluttering in the breeze, the couple reaffirming their love and commitment on the eve of battle. It was an image that would long remain in the minds of those who witnessed it, including that of a young UEAF public relations officer who was taking pictures of the aftermath of the base attack. The transport landed at the Terra Nova's CP at Berlin Airport, Stalker walking off to the welcome sight of black armored soldiers and vehicles. Stalker found Link overseeing the placement of the company and was soon fully brought up to speed on the situation. The Terra Nova had been designated to be part of the Mobile Reserve for Army Group Germany alongside commando units from the regional USOC base at Spandau and several independent brigades of mechanized infantry and armor. With uncertainty about where, when, or even if Deimos ground forces would land the heavy UEA infantry, armor, and mechanized divisions of each, the recently established regional army groups were entrenched to protected vital industrial and population centers. Once enemy landings took place and a better picture of Deimos strategy emerged, the divisions of the Mobile Reserve would reinforce critical sectors and launch local spoiling attacks until the heavier formations could be redeployed to meet the enemy in strength. With an alien invasion of Earth now a reality, the entirety of the Terra Nova's 10 regiments had reverted to their combat role, and when the division went into combat, it would go into the fight at a full strength of around 20,000. Within a short time of landing, Stalker, his CCU, and those of the other companies in the Second Terra Nova were summoned to the regimental CP for an update from Big D. Stalker with Link and the rest of the CCU in tow strode into a lounge in the civilian airport terminal that was serving as the Second Terra Nova's regimental command post. In one corner, Big D and his regimental staff were assembled, the arriving company commanders and staffs forming a 180-degree arc of black armored forms around them. Once everyone had arrived, D began, his gruff voice easily carrying to the 80 men gathered around him. Gentlemen, we are now on 24-hour invasion alert. Within the next 6 hours, all forces will have completed their withdrawal from the outer defense perimeter. All over Earth, the imminent invasion protocols have been enacted, where possible civilians will retreat to hardened shelters and essential basic services have been placed under UDF control. But do not delude yourselves. If the Deimos lands, civilian casualties will be unavoidable. There are far too few shelters to support anywhere near the total population, and they are far too scattered for everyone to reach. I need all of you to harden your hearts for what is to come. Victory must be our only concern. Failure and retreat in this fight is not an option. Every inch of ground we lose is one that we will have to retake, one that will be under alien control, and one that will have been lost for humanity. The midnight black armored soldiers of the Second Terra Nova stood listening to D like a dark wall, their focus absolute, while round Earth countless other men and women were busy preparing to defend their home planet with a grim determination, a determination that bordered on the reckless. Dee had talked for several minutes about the various unit dispositions in the Terra Nova's AO, but as he reached the end of his briefing a change came over him, his voice becoming hard. This is what the Terra Nova was founded for. This is the hour that will be talked about for 1,000 years. This will be the moment that will make or break humanity. We have all sworn oaths to protect the Earth and to defend the League, and we will not be alone. All around the planet and in the space above it, millions of your brothers and sisters in the UDF stand at your side, ready to repel any invader, all volunteers, all prepared to give everything to protect their world, all heroes. Dee took off his EEA helmet with its skull relief, letting it drop to the ground. When the hour comes, look for me at the very front where the fighting is at its heaviest. It will be the greatest honor of my life to stand at, and if need be, to die at your side. I will meet the enemy face to face, and I will know no fear. Who will come with me? In unison, the entire group took a step forward with a resounding crash of armored boots on the tiled floor. Stalker felt a bloodlust rising in his veins he had not previously known, the energy in the air seeming to crackle between the veteran warriors. We will meet them with such fury that they will fear us. We will inflict such losses and destruction upon them that they will never again dare to challenge the children of Earth. The chant started slowly at first, but grew steadily louder until it echoed through the terminal, civilian workers stopping to listen and watch as the cry of death to all split the air. Pierce knelt down and picked up the flower and twirled it between his fingers. The delicate flower was a deep purple with a delicate structure. Pierce recognized it as a Siberian iris, a wildflower that grew locally. The flower had clearly been picked some time before, and its petals were beginning to droop. Pierce looked at the others scattered across the floor where they had fallen. The purple mixed with the deep crimson of dried blood. Pierce smelt the flower, but there was only a faint wisp of scent remaining. "Anything else I can get for you, specialist?" Pierce shook his head without looking up. "No, I have everything I need." Pierce took one last look at the flower before gently placing it back on the floor. Standing, Pierce swept his keen eyes over the scene. The body had been removed from the cafe the day before by the civilian authorities, but the blood from the cafe owner remained. The floor of the cafe was covered in a mix of blood and flowers that had fallen from a vase on the counter as the women had fallen. Glancing out of the window, Pierce could see the blackened ruins of an entrance to UEF Ramstein nearby, the ruined gate now guarded by a score of heavily armed USA commandos. As soon as the details of the attacks on UEDF facilities had begun to emerge, Pierce had known that Atlas had been involved. Some of them had required knowledge not available to the average soldier, the sort of knowledge Atlas excelled at procuring. They also had Atlas's trademarks of surprise, confusion, and treachery. The man seemed to breed chaos wherever he went. Of all the attacks, it had been Ramstein which had immediately drawn Pierce's attention, the cause being the one element that didn't fit, the death of a civilian cafe owner. All the other attacks, despite their ferocity, had been exclusively targeted at military personnel, employees, and contractors. The cafe owner did not fit the pattern. It had not taken Pierce long to find what he had been looking for. Other than the removal of the body, the cafe had been left as it was, the attack on nearby UEF Ramstein taking priority. Pierce and the small team of specialist forensic investigators he had brought with him had swept the cafe for clues. Almost immediately, they had noted a used ceramic mug on the cafe's counter, directly opposite the position for where the owner had been shot. The mug had contained one perfect fingerprint. The print belonged to Atlas Heerden. Pierce knew it was no accident. The man he was hunting didn't make mistakes. It was a message. Atlas had wanted the intelligence branch to know he was on Earth. Pierce swept his eyes over the cafe again, trying to imagine the chaos as the patrons saw the owner murdered in front of them, the panic as people fled. Chairs remained tipped over, small personal items abandoned in the rush for the exits left on tables. Mugs remained on the cafe floor where they had fallen. The murder of the owner still perplexed Pierce. What insult had the woman done to Atlas? A word misspoken, an unintended gesture, a slight tone in her voice, or had she done nothing and he had just decided to make her his message? Pierce dismissed his momentary confusion. It made no sense to ponder the actions of those who acted without reason. Pierce activated his secure comm unit. "This is De Veers. Sir, it's Pierce. He's here." The recently promoted Vice Admiral Yoshiro Matsuda shifted slightly in his seat, his discomfort coming from the lack of activity from the enemy rather than any fault in the seat's design. He glanced around the bridge, seeing that it was the picture of quiet efficiency, everyone at their stations and doing what they should be. He liked his new flagship, although a much smaller vessel than the massive Birds of Prey-class assault carrier UES Osprey he had previously commanded. The bridge of the brand-new Astrology-class battlecruiser UES Aquarius was bristling with the most up-to-date systems and technology available. He had transferred his flag less than 24 hours before, having been promoted to full admiral and been given command of the newly formed Task Force 16. The main striking power of Task Force 16 consisted of the battlecruiser Aquarius and the cruisers Hades, Atlantic, Dakar, Ares, and Helsinki. It also included 10 smaller vessels for tribal-class destroyers, the Aztec, Tuareg, Huron, Celtic, 3 island-class destroyers, the Cyprus, Leyte, and Aleutian, and 3 hunter-class frigates, the Lynx, Mantis, and Viper. Along with his new command had come new orders. Task Force 16 was one of several task forces which would screen the main fleet and harass the enemy's flanks. It was a task that required speed, nerve, discipline, and more than a little bit of daring. Like all of the task force commanders, Admiral Matsuda had been given access to the overall UEF defense plan so that he would better understand his place in it once action began. The First Fleet, now designated as the Home Fleet, had at its disposal 10 assault carriers, although some were heavily damaged and could serve as little more than stationary platforms for aircraft. There were also around 20 battleships and battlecruisers, over 40 cruisers, and dozens of smaller destroyers and frigates. Many of the cruisers and smaller vessels of the UEF had been formed up into mobile task forces operating in the space around Earth, while the heavy capital ships and carriers were formed into a small number of powerful squadrons under the Home Fleet. The heavy squadrons were gathered around UEF Luna ready to strike the Deimos fleet when it showed itself, their primary goal being to keep between the Deimos fleet and Earth and inflict losses on the enemy. It was accepted, however, that some landings would be virtually unavoidable if the Deimos sought them. Deimos ships had shown an uncanny skill in their use of jump engines, and even with the strength of the UEF, there was simply too much space to cover to prevent all landings. To reinforce the close and planetary defenses, old orbital defense stations had been hurriedly revamped and new ones were being deployed as fast as they could be manufactured. The fleet's air cover had also been reinforced, with every warship carrying as many fighters and missiles as could be squeezed into them. Numerous merchant ships also being commandeered as makeshift carriers for Marine and UEF aircraft. Matsuda had just been about to ask for the results from the latest sensor calibration when he was interrupted by the excited voice of his Tactical Staff Officer, or TSO. "Sir, we have enemy ships emerging in Sector 28 Whiskey." "Very well. Notify command that we have sighted the enemy." He turned to his Navigational Staff Officer, NSO, seeing that she was already activating her systems, her hands dancing across the keys on her console. He had chosen her from the list of available candidates due to her experience, but especially for her high scores in jump accuracy and a rather surprising personal recommendation in her service file from a Terra Nova battle commander. "Janet, let me know as soon as you have our jump coordinates plotted." Janet Combs answered without looking as she furiously plotted jump coordinates and entry and exit trajectories. "Yes, Admiral. Plotting now. When I know you'll know." Matsuda smiled at her tone. His old commander, Admiral Lev, had been a strict disciplinarian, but Matsuda liked a bit of fire in his officers. General De Veers dismissed the intelligence branch colonel, who quickly left, and then put the piece of paper on the table. Across from De Veers, the UEL chairman looked up from his computer. De Veers said nothing. He just nodded to the unspoken question in the chairman's eyes. "The confirmation at last, General. What we both knew was coming has finally arrived. Fate has a funny sense of timing, it seems. The UEL chairman brought a hand up and massaged his temple, the strain of the past weeks and a lack of sleep showing on his features. The Navy is moving to engage as we speak. We have no confirmation yet on the size of the enemy forces. Thank you, General. This is only the beginning. They won't stop now. De Veers sat at one of the desk's comfortable leather seats, silence filling the room for a moment. Tell me, General, are you a religious man? De Veers considered his answer, allowing his busy mind to drop the plethora of issues swirling within for a moment's quiet contemplation. In my life and career, Mr. Chairman, I have learnt and seen many things that would both provoke belief and silence it. As for myself, I choose to put my faith in myself and the few who I trust and respect to do what is right, to make the best decisions they can based on what they know, to steer the narrow path between good and evil. And are we on the side of good? Have we made the right decisions? We have done all we can. We have used our experiences and wisdom to guide our decisions as best we could with a clear mind and virtuous intent. That is all that can be expected of anyone. The chairman weighed the general's words for a moment, the silence only broken by the sound of passing footsteps outside the door in the passageway. You are a wise man, General. I'm glad to have had your counsel over the past weeks. It has been my honor to assist you as best I have been able, sir. The chairman stood and switched off his computer. The speech he had been working on no longer needed. He extended his hand and shook hands with the steely-eyed general across from him. It's time to tell them. Good luck, Jacob. Good luck to us all. The chairman walked out of the office, a pair of intelligence branch pathfinders snapping to attention. As he walked to the heavy wooden doors at the end of the hall, another pair of waiting guards snapped to attention. One of the pathfinders hitting a switch on his EEA suit that activated the reinforced doors. As the doors swung open, a vast chamber was revealed, the sounds of thousands of voices emanating from within. With one final pause to collect his thoughts, and then, with a deep breath, he stepped across the threshold. Jump coordinates locked. All stations report ready, Admiral. Very good. What's the status of Van Leeuwen and Sigvard? Task Forces 8 and 11 report ready, Admiral. Excellent. Notify them to engage jump engines in 30 seconds. From his chair, Admiral Matsuda felt a slight lurch as the Aquarius jumped. It was followed almost immediately by another as the ship slipped out of faster-than-light speed. With his 3DSI helmet, Matsuda saw his small task force emerge at near point-blank range to a mass of Deimos warships. The number and type of enemy ships seemed to be beyond calculation. Activate Nexus. Nexus is online, Admiral. Excellent. Launch fighters. All ships fire at will. And remember, keep the fighters on a tight leash. No one gets left behind. From the ships of Task Force, 1,600s of Marine and UEF fighters poured into the crowded space. As they emerged, the dark space erupted with missiles and the bright flashes of cannons and railguns as the task force opened fire on the surprised Deimos fleet. The fighters immediately locked onto the nearest Deimos ships and released the powerful anti-ship missiles they were carrying. As the heavy missiles leapt from the wing hardpoints and internal weapons, the fighters switched to cannons and air-to-air missiles and began to maneuver, set free from the considerable weight of the ordnance. Matsuda thought the battle looked like the nature documentaries he had watched prodigiously as a child, where packs of wolves hounded and harassed herds of caribou. The ships and fighters of the task force unleashed a storm of missile and cannon fire at the edges of the Deimos fleet, some of the ships being so close that it seemed they would certainly collide. In the distance at two other points beyond the fury of the battle, Matsuda could also see other areas where firing raged, the other task forces having also jumped into the enemy to give battle. Admiral, all ships report primary magazines empty. Signal the task force. Retrieve all fighters and prepare for jump. The fire around the ships steadily increased as the fighters landed, and the Deimos began to react to the sudden assault. What's the status of the other ships? All are operational and report ready, Admiral. Navigation. Jump when ready. With a flash, Task Force 16 jumped several thousand kilometers into clear space. What's the state of the other task forces? Task Force 8 is intact and has disengaged. Task Force 11 is showing -1 frigate. I don't know what got her, sir. Matsuda was about to reply when a distant series of rippling flashes drew his attention. Matsuda spoke to his tactical staff officer, TSO. Without looking away from the continuing flashes, "Tactical, you see it?" "Yes, sir, wait one." A moment passed in silence before the TSO spoke again. "Admiral, we have enemy ships emerging in 5, no 6 sectors. Strength. Impossible to tell. Heavy jamming is blocking long-range sensors, and they are beyond visual range lots." Matsuda paused for a moment, the visual picture of the enemy fleets forming in his mind. The Deimos were attacking from all directions at once, trying to divide and overwhelm the combined UEF. The multidirectional attack would force the UEF to either try to cover all the enemy fleets, something they were too weak to do, or to concentrate on one or two of them, leaving Earth exposed. The possibility had been planned for, and Matsuda knew what was expected of him and the other task forces. The main fleet would not be divided. The more mobile task forces would hound the enemy and keep them off balance while the fleet's heavy squadrons engaged the Deimos fleets one at a time. Deimos ships would get through and land ground forces on Earth and the Moon, but it couldn't be helped. They had to give ground somewhere if they were to stand a chance at defeating the numerically superior Deimos. Even as he watched, Matsuda could see the other task forces begin to react, turning to face the new threats, while the main fleet with its powerful assault carriers and capital ships headed for the largest enemy concentration to give battle. "Admiral, all magazines and fighter wings report ready." "Very well. Janet, plot us a speed course for the enemy fleet in Sector 47. Bring us in as close as you dare." "Already done, sir. Ready on your order." "Very good. Execute the jump." "What are you grumbling about, Private?" "Sorry, sir." "Nothing, sir." "Well, keep your eyes on the sky, then, and do it quietly." Company Sergeant Major, CSM, of the 1503rd Air Defense Company, shook his head. He had slept little in the preceding weeks, his every waking moment spent getting the reservists that made up his new command up to speed on their equipment. Equipment? He almost laughed at that. The weapons they had been were issued were antiques, and had been withdrawn from active service before he had begun his UEA career over 30 years before. He glanced over at the 12 guns that made up the company's 2 6-gun batteries. The barrels of the twin 25mm dual-purpose radar-guided multiple-barreled cannons were aimed skyward, their positions well concealed amongst the trees. In the center of each battery was a box-like guidance radar that controlled all 6 guns. At that moment, the radars were deactivated to keep the positions concealed, the emissions of the old-type active search radars easily detectable. The guns had also suffered from their long period spent in storage, and he had been forced to switch 2 guns to their backup manual optical tracking. After a fruitless search for spare parts, he had relegated the 2 faulty guns to their secondary role of direct ground fire and had deployed them to defend the best approaches to the company's position. The CSM turned his mind away from the grumblings of his reservists and the inadequacy of his equipment. He looked out from his hilltop viewpoint at the surrounding scenery. They were surrounded by a virtual wall of green, the tall conifer trees only broken by the lines made by the occasional road or stream, while in the distance the buildings of the small town of Tripstad were just visible. He had to admit the Pfalzerwald Nature Park was undoubtedly one of the most scenic places to which he had been posted during his career and rivaled many of the larger, more well-known nature parks in Germany for its beauty. The area was relatively sparsely populated, its population limited by the UEL's strict ecology preservation laws. The area was a popular location for hiking and nature retreats, as well as being famous for its local homemade food, with people from all over Germany coming to the area during the summer months. He took a breath, the faint scent of pine needles mixed with damp filling his lungs, a quick check of the sky revealing no sign of the clouds that had produced the earlier rain. A sudden series of dull rumbles broke the tranquil scene, and everywhere eyes looked skyward for the unseen source of the deep, ominous sounds. The CSM scrutinized the sky with an experienced eye and thought he could make out slight flashes against the bright midday sky. But the altitude of the activity was far beyond any identifiable visual range. He mused quietly to himself. Something is going on. Corporal Hauber, a man in camouflage battle dress wearing a large communications pack, came at the run before skidding to a stop, reporting, "As ordered, sir. Get on that squawk box and see what regional command knows about that noise." The man hurriedly began to fiddle with his communications set, the seconds passing by. "I haven't got all day, Corporal. I'm sorry, sir. I'm having trouble getting through. I can't seem to connect to the regional networks. There seems to be some problem with the set." "Let me take a look." He leaned in and checked the signal strength, quickly seeing that the signal kept connecting and then dropping out almost immediately. "Excuse me, sir, are those our ships?" The CSM turned skyward, ignoring the nearby reservist infantryman who had asked the question from his hastily dug slit trench. His eyes widened at the sight. The gray sky was filled with massive lumbering spacecraft, the glow of their engines showing a bright orange against the dull horizon. As he watched a pair of Delta winged fighters pass between two of the nearest ships, strange glyph symbols visible on their wings as they rolled. "Sir, all batteries fire at will. Engage the nearest targets by twos. Move it." The men scrambled to follow his orders, and after a few seconds of warm-up delay, the company's 2 search radars energized. In an instant, the sky was filled with long bursts of heavy tracer shells, and the air was torn by the ripping buzz made by the multiple barreled cannons as they spun, and each spat out shells at a rate of around 4,000 rounds per minute. The pair of prowling fighters were shredded by long bursts of fire and went spiraling to the ground, the lines of tracer shells following them down. The guns then switched to the nearest of the big ships, the dirty brown hull being peppered by the combined fire of all 12 guns, the 2 faulty guns joining in with their optical tracking, the simple backup gun sights barely even needed with such a large target. The large ship shuddered slightly, its engines taking multiple hits, before suddenly dropping like a stone to the wooded terrain beneath it. From the surrounding ships issued more and more Delta winged fighters, and cannon fire had just begun to impact around the 2 batteries when a pair of blindingly fast missiles tore into the 2 search radars, shattering them in dual flashes. The guns fell silent for a moment as they changed to their backup optical tracking and the gunners sought targets. Then columns of fire once again began to lash out at any aircraft within range. The plummeting ship impacted the earth with a resounding crash that momentarily drowned out the buzzing roar of the blazing anti-aircraft cannons. After their initial surprise, the Deimos forces began to respond in earnest, with heavy missile and energy fire beginning to pepper the hilltop, the rounds shattering trees and sending splinters flying. The CSM of the 1503rd Air Defense Company spat blood onto the moist mixture of dark soil and pine needles that made up the ground on the hilltop. He rolled onto his back and between hacking coughs dragged himself to a nearby tree and propped himself up so he could see what was going on. He ignored the long splinters of wood that were sticking out from his chest and arms and instead looked towards his batteries. One was completely out of action, the twisted guns surrounded by the prone forms of dead and dying men, camouflage netting burning from the impacts of superheated energy fire. The second battery was also a picture of destruction, although from amongst the smoke he could still see bursts of tracer fire arcing skyward and the shapes of moving bodies. Suddenly from behind him there was a blur of movement, and tall, lithe figures ran past, firing bursts of red fire from long energy rifles. He tried to call out, but his voice failed him in a fit of coughing, and as he watched impotently his remaining men were taken totally by surprise, the unexpected assault cutting scores of them down. The reservists responded with desperate tenacity, the remaining operational guns switching to the new threat, the heavy shells sweeping the tree lines. As his blood drained into the ground and his eyelids began to feel heavy, he wondered what had happened to the security detachment he had placed on the slope that the aliens had come from. He knew that they were likely dead, the weekend warriors no match for the speed of the assault from the woods. He looked down at his hands. Blood was running down the fingers and dripping off, the warm liquid steaming slightly in the cool woodland air. He suddenly realized that it had grown quiet and looked around in curiosity, his mind fuzzy, blinking rapidly to keep his eyes open. The air above was filled with descending alien ships and patrolling fighters. An acrid smoke burned his throat and nose. Suddenly, he felt a sharp blow to his side of his head, and he tumbled across the ground. Strong hands seized him, and he was rolled onto his back. His view being filled with an alien wearing an elongated full-face helmet and holding an energy rifle aimed at his face. The alien turned and spoke in deep rumbling tones to another who walked up and scrutinized the prone man. The second alien issued a rumbling reply and walked away. The CSM of the 1503rd Air Defense Company just had time to register the red flash before the superheated energy bolt pierced his left eye, leaving his face a steaming mess of sizzling gore. The Deimos warrior did a quick ammunition check before moving off to rejoin its unit to continue the hunt for the few human survivors who had managed to escape into the surrounding woods. Stalker was in the middle of chatting to a 105th Terra Nova unit commander about his company's supply situation when the base alarms activated. In the same instant, everyone paused as information and orders streamed through the TACnet to their HUDs. Stalker quickly read the data twice before reacting. It was an imminent move order and an immediate company commander's briefing at the regimental CPs. Link, who was waiting at Stalker's side, spoke first. "So, where are we going, boss?" "I have no idea, Link. Let's go find out." As they headed for the second Terra Nova's, CP Stalker shot orders to the rest of his CCU, ordering them to get the company to their designated transports so they could deploy at a moment's notice. Stalker and the rest of the second Terra Nova's company commanders made it to the CP in record time, all of them keen to find out the situation and meet the enemy. Few greetings were exchanged, the anxious men waiting in silence for Big D to tell them the situation. After a few moments, D turned from his staff to address them, while behind him a hollow display was activated, a large map appearing. "All right, everyone, listen up. The fleet has engaged Deimos forces in the space around Earth, and Deimos forces have penetrated our defensive perimeter and made landings at multiple locations around the planet, including the ETO in southern Germany." Everyone tensed at the news, which came with a mixture of trepidation and excitement. The long-anticipated invasion had begun, and the enemy had landed in the Terra Nova's theater of operations. Here's the situation as best we can tell. The Deimos appear to be using some of the network of nature parks in southern Germany as initial landing points and have successfully landed despite fierce resistance from local defense units. D paused and took a breath, a knowing brief silence passing unbroken. They all knew that many had already died in the fight for Earth, a battle which was only just beginning. Big D turned to the map, a staff officer operating the holographic controls and bringing up the appropriate region. The main Deimos landings in the ETO have taken place across two southern nature parks, primarily in the Saarhunsruck and Pfalzerwald, while a third smaller landing has taken place around Heidelberg. In the Saarhunsruck, Deimos forces have landed around Wadern and are expanding their bridgehead in all directions. In the Pfalzerwald, the landings were focused on the small towns of Tripstad and Elmstein, and the Deimos forces are pushing north towards Kaiserslautern and west towards Landstuhl. At Heidelberg, the primary Deimos push appears to be west towards Mannheim. Our forces in the region of the landings consist of 4 full-strength divisions, although numerous regional defense, reserve, and militia units spread across the region are also taking part in the fighting as we speak. As best we can tell, here is the current tactical situation on the ground. The 13th Armored Division is entrenched in the suburbs around Mannheim, with several RDR battalions in support. They're being hit by Deimos forces from the Heidelberg landings, and for the moment at least, are managing to hold their ground. The 51st Mechanized Division is at Saarbrücken, and its forward elements are, as we speak, pushing to the north and east to contain the Deimos landings in the Saarhunsruck and Pfalzerwald. The 7th Armored Cavalry Division is serving as southern Germany's mobile reserve and is pushing south from the city of Mainz, with its forward elements pushing down Highway 63 to reinforce the 45th Infantry Division. The 45th Infantry is entrenched around Kaiserslautern and Landstuhl and has been heavily engaged by Deimos forces pushing north from Tripstad and Elmstein. The Deimos forces have punched into the outer suburbs of Landstuhl with the clear intent of taking UEF Ramstein, which is in the process of being evacuated. This is the danger point. The Landstuhl-Ramstein corridor is the narrowest point between the two nature parks, and all efforts are being made to hold it to prevent the two landing zones from linking up, but it doesn't look good. For this reason, TACCOM is planning to insert the Terra Nova as close to this area of the front as possible, with every available air asset being mobilized to give us cover for the lift. When we get the green light, we will be landing at a civilian airport on the outskirts of the city of Koblenz. From there, we will push south until we meet resistance before digging in and holding the line until sufficient forces can be spared to eliminate the landing zones. We hold the line and contain them in airtight pockets in and around the nature parks. A battle commander spoke up. What are we holding here for if the fight is already underway? D turned to face him. We are holding here until Stratcom determines that this is the main assault in the ETO. If we commit to early, we could be outmaneuvered by fresh landings in other areas. The man nodded, apparently satisfied. Big D was just about to go on when a rushing regimental staff officer passed him a note. Sir, an urgent message from Alpha 1. D paused as he read the orders, taking the time to read it twice as they had all been taught to ensure accuracy. Forget that last bit. We're moving out ASAP. Get your men to their transports. Let's go. Good luck and good hunting. Stalker was immensely pleased to be back on terra firma. The flight to Koblenz had been as tense a flight as he could ever remember. Around a vast armada of transports that had lifted the entire division had been multiple rings of air defenses, the combined formation acting like a massive wedge that pushed its way through all opposition thrown up by the Deimos. Even as they touched down, the titanic aerial battle continued. The TAC net alive with the sounds of intense combat, as the UEF pushed its pilots and machines to their limits in the skies of southern Germany. Stalker jogged to his diamond scale and jumped up just as it began to roll forward. The division's companies moving out as soon as they had assembled, starting down the southern road towards Ramstein and Landstuhl at their best speed. Stalker was knocked around as he climbed into the diamond scale's observation position, the vehicle slewing as it turned its speed onto the paved roads. Everywhere around, black armored vehicles were in motion. With a blur, two black Terra Nova Striders flash by on their ion thrusters, the heavily armed Griffin pattern Striders amongst dozens that were moving up to scout ahead of the advancing division. Stalker felt trepidation as they rushed to meet the Deimos, the tall trees that flanked the narrow roads forming the pathway that would lead them to war. It wasn't the Deimos themselves, but the lack of information that most concerned him. They had no idea of the enemy's strength or disposition, the network of satellites in orbit having been largely eliminated and heavy atmospheric jamming hampering almost all communications. The advance was in essence combat by feel, the enemy's location and extent of advance largely unknown. It was like searching in the dark for a sharp object, Stalker thought. You knew it was there, that it was dangerous, and that it was close, but you could not see it and had to resort feeling your way forward in the gloom. Zoe threw a quick glance back at the base as she throttled up to full power, the heavy skirmisher shuddering slightly as the thrust of its engines fought its dead weight. Dark plumes of smoke rose from several points across the airbase at Frankfurt, and amongst the base buildings, vehicles and people could be seen hurrying about. Zoe was relieved to be off the ground and to be back in control of her own destiny. Within moments of the report of Deimos landings coming through to the base command and control center, a flight of low-flying missiles had arrived at UEF Ramstein. These had been immediately followed by a determined attack on the base's air defenses by Deimos fighters. The base had taken heavy damage, many pilots and flight crew being killed before they could reach their aircraft, the losses made worse by the numbers still being detained by the intelligence branch as potential security risks. After the withdrawal to Frankfurt, Zoe had managed to muster only 16 skirmishers, under half of the regiment's full strength of 40 airframes. She had quickly divided them into two makeshift squadrons, one commanded by herself, the other by the only one of her 4 squadron commanders who wasn't imprisoned, dead, or missing. Zoe looked ahead and could just make out a shape of 2 recon UAVs that were acting as the lead element for her skirmishers. She had received urgent orders to carry out a strike on advancing Deimos armor north of Landstuhl, and as she watched the other makeshift squadron and one of the UAVs broke off and headed towards their assigned targets closer to Kaiserslautern. There was no radio chatter as the formations divided, strict communication silence being in effect for the operation. As they closed on Landstuhl, Zoe and the other pilots pushed their skills to the limits. The ground appearing so close that Zoe had the sensation that she could reach out and pick leaves from the passing trees. The TACnet was filled with furious communications traffic, and Zoe watched as the number of hostile search and tracking radars displayed on her threat display increased alarmingly. Several times, Zoe's heart froze in her chest as she spotted unknown aircraft moving in the distance, but they continued on, seemingly unaware of the flight of low-flying skirmishers. Once they had reached the designated coordinates, the recon UAV pushed ahead to locate the enemy, the 8 skirmishers decreasing their speed and hugging the ground even tighter. Zoe spotted a large field ringed by a box-like wall of trees and led her squadron into it, the hovering assault gunships pausing only feet above the ground as they waited for their forward eyes to report back. Zoe allowed herself a moment between scanning the sky for threats to listen to the litany of communications traffic. The reports from the frontline regional defense, reserve battalions, and units of the 45th Infantry Division were all bad. Almost all of Landstuhl had now been invested by the Deimos, with final desperate fighting taking place around UEF Ramstein and Ramstein proper just to the north. Desperate officers were reporting being deluged by enemy infantry and armor, and calls reporting mecha and enemy airstrikes were also coming thick and fast. About 20 kilometers to the south of the field, an electronic I was watching with interest, and it had seen movement. Safe at his console in a secure bunker in northern Germany, the recon UAV's operator flicked the controls to auto-hover and turned his full attention to the vision coming through from the UAV's front-mounted optics. A long column of Deimos armor was approaching the small town of Weilerbach. The operator counted over 3 dozen vehicles accompanied by mecha. As he watched, the leading gravity tanks and mecha fired their long railguns into the town, shattering several buildings. From the town, several missiles appeared in reply, but most were knocked down before reaching the enemy column, and they succeeded in killing only one slider. He had seen enough, and quickly using the touch function of his screen, he marked 16 high-value targets, the image of each vehicle now surrounded by a designator box and an identity number. With the targets now marked, he sent the go code to the waiting skirmishers, the coded microburst transmission attracting no attention from the distant armored column, which was busy reducing the town of Weilerbach to rubble. Zoe saw the target icon flash up on her HUD and immediately went to full power, her skirmisher jumping over the tree line before once again dropping down to nap of the Earth flight, the others mirroring her movements. Speed was now of the essence, and she knew it. They had to push ahead and get into range to deliver the attack before the enemy could react. The formation closed the distance rapidly, all the pilots keeping an eye on the distance indicators in their HUDs. They were approaching weapons range. As she jumped her skirmisher over a small farmstead at high speed, passing between 2 trees, Zoe saw the indicator change color. They were in range. With a flick of her finger on the control stick, she released the weapon's safeties and fired. On the belly of the skirmisher, 2 internal weapons bay doors opened, and one after the other, 2 heavy Hellstrike missiles fell from each bay. In total, the 8 skirmishers launched 32 missiles, the powerful missiles quickly leaving the assault gunships behind as their scramjet engines kicked into high gear. Guided by their smart terrain following guidance computers, the missiles streaked to their targets. As they approached the town, the missiles' guidance was taken over by the nearby UAV. This allowed them greater accuracy, although they could also be fired completely blind and still find targets on their own thanks to their backup, smart visual target identification software. The missiles bore rapidly down on the distracted enemy column, 2 to a target. The speed of their approach so rapid that even once the automated defense systems of the Deimos vehicles detected the surface skimming supersonic missiles, it was all but too late. A few of the Deimos vehicles and mecha managed to react in time and launched decoys or opened fire on the incoming missiles, but most were too slow. In one blistering moment, the missiles slammed home, over a dozen armored vehicles and mecha being destroyed or crippled by the missile's powerful smart warheads. The UAV operator quickly selected another 8 points in a shattered column and sent another command to the fast-approaching skirmishers of the UAV. Zoe saw the icon flash up on her HUD and didn't hesitate, quickly changing her weapon selection and firing. From beneath each of the skirmishers dropped another 2 missiles, the weapons being shorter and thicker than the more slender and lengthy Hellstrikes. About 2 minutes had passed since the Hellstrikes had impacted, and the convoy was a flurry of activity as the Deimos infantry dispersed from their transports and began to treat their wounded, and amazingly continue the attack on Weilerbach. Above the hundreds of scurrying Deimos, the Advanced Modular Fragmentation Missiles, or AMFMs, arrived virtually unopposed. At 50 feet above the column they detonated, the explosions rippling across the column. The anti-personnel weapons showing a vast area with lethal fragments designed specifically to penetrate body armor and tear flesh. The effect was devastating, with scores of tall Deimos figures cut down in an instant as the wave of lethal fragments swept across the column. As Zoe crested the last small ridge outside of Weilerbach, the true panorama of the destruction she and her squadron had wrought was revealed, a dark line of smoke and burning fires marking the end of the line for hundreds of Deimos. As they swept forward, the skirmishers spread out slightly, so they were in a staggered line and bore down on the shattered column. Zoe saw several target icons appear on her HUD as the skirmishers' targeting systems detected surviving armored vehicles and infantry. Zoe quickly selected her cannon and, without slowing, opened fire, walking her cannon fire across the line of vehicles. From a line of assault gunships, 8 lines of heavy cannon shells strafed the Deimos forces, the large-caliber cannon rounds sowing destruction. From the apparently shattered line of armored vehicles came a surprising amount of return fire, lines of tracers arcing up towards the charging aircraft. Zoe felt more than heard the impacts on the fuselage, the vibrations traveling up through the aircraft to the control stick, each feeling like it could be the last. Zoe had almost reached the enemy when she saw a sudden bright flash to her left. She turned just in time to see the near skirmisher get straddled by a line of heavy tracer rounds, the explosive shells punching through its frontal armor. The large aircraft nosedived to the ground before going cartwheeling in a fireball. Without pause, the rest of the squadron blasted over the enemy line at full speed and began to angle away, heading for home, tracers still chasing them. Without warning, a missile blazed across the front of the formation of skirmishers, blotting one of them out in a sudden flash. Zoe saw a delta-shaped aircraft flash by above them, and keeping it in sight, switched to air-to-air missiles and fired. A small agile air-to-air missile dropped from the central weapons bay and immediately changed direction. Heading in the direction Zoe was looking, the all-aspect air-to-air missile slaved to Zoe's helmet-mounted targeting system, which had locked onto the fast-moving Deimos fighter. Both the missile and fighter disappeared from sight as Zoe threw her skirmisher into a roll. Missiles and maneuvering aircraft filling the small, deadly space over the town as the skirmishers desperately tried to escape from the enraged Deimos fighters.